Welcome to this IChemE Safety Centre webinar on equality, diversity and inclusion in safety. For this webinar, you'll notice we're using Zoom rather than GoToWebinar. That is because we wanted to be inclusive, particularly in this webinar, and have chosen Zoom for its ability to deliver closed captioning. We ask that you turn your cameras off and stay on mute during the webinar. We'll be taking questions and please use the chat function to send them to us. We will endeavour to get to your questions and may also provide some answers after the event. In 2020, we conducted our first Fireside Chat webinar with Dame Judith Hackett and Jane Cutler, and this was well received as a new format for the ISC webinars. We wanted to continue with at least one of these types of webinars each year. Given there are some real safety implications from a lack of ED&I, and IChemE has commenced work in this important area, we thought this would be a great topic of conversation. My name is Trish Kerin, and I'm the Director of the ISC. I'm joined today by one of IChemE's trustees, Macsene Isles-Ahite, who is leading the IChemE working group on ED&I. Macsene graduated from South Bank University with a BE in Honours in 2001. She has almost 20 years experience as a process engineer in the refining and petrochemical industry. Since 2011, she has been offering her services as a self-employed process engineering consultant who has designed both onshore and offshore facilities to various companies operating within the oil and gas sector. As managing director of her limited company, she migrates between engineering contractor companies and engineering consultancy companies, consulting on various aspects of process safety design and safety analysis. She provides her clients with her experience, expertise, and competence. Macsene was the chair of the Milton Keynes member group from May 2005 until July 2007. During her tenure as chair, she focused on promoting the benefits of member engagement. Her efforts resulted in increasing regional member attendance. In 2008, her daughter was born and her engagement with IChemE decreased to that of paying her annual membership fees. In 2018, however, following the controversy resulting from the EGM, Macsene became re-engaged and was elected as an ordinary member of the newly formed Board of Trustees. She strongly believes that to effect change, engagement is essential. She engaged in order to exert influence and contribute to the ongoing efforts to change systemic behaviours with regard to ED&I. She would like to encourage all members to get more engaged and to actively contribute to shaping the future of IChemE. Macsene, welcome and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Trish.
I'm also joined by David Lloyd-Roach, IChemE's Director Qualifications, who leads the staff effort in ED&I. David joined IChemE in 2017, initially to provide interim cover as a Director of Qualifications. He became permanent in the role in early 2018. David is a mechanical engineering graduate and served 20 years in the Royal Air Force as an aeronautics system engineering officer. During this time, he was primarily responsible for aircraft maintenance, although he specialised in weapons system safety and explosives ordnance disposal, EOD. He holds a master's degree in explosives ordnance engineering. His service included an EOD tour of Kuwait at the end of the First Gulf War and a tour with the Ministry of Defence's Ordnance Board, the body responsible for safety of new weapons introduction into the three services. On leaving the RAF, he spent 4 years working in the IT sector in operations management and business development. He joined the Institute of Civil Engineers in late 2002, where he spent over 12 years. For 10 years, he was ICE's Director of Membership and was responsible for membership, qualifications, international and UK operations, marketing and ED&I. David is an honorary fellow of the Society of the Environment and is currently chairs its registration authority. He's one of SOC-Eng's board members. Welcome, David. So it's quite apt today that we are having this webinar on International Women's Day. The theme for International Women's Day 2021 is Choose to Challenge. And this is such a great theme from a safety perspective, as challenge is one of the most critical actions that we can take to deliver safety outcomes. Before we get into the webinar properly, just like to remind you to use the chat function to ask any questions, and we'll try and get to them. Please stay on mute and keep your cameras on mute. For those of you wondering, yes, there is actually an International Men's Day. It's the 19th of November each year. Invariably, I am asked that at least once every International Women's Day. It is important to state up front, though, this webinar is not just about women, and we certainly welcome all of you attending. ED&I is about not excluding anybody. It's about bringing people together. And when we talk about the impact engineers can have on the world, it's really important to understand how we can get better outcomes, both in terms of safety as well as productivity, when we have a truly inclusive environment. Before we get started, we've got some poll questions that we'd like to ask to get an understanding of how you identify and also some of your feelings and concerns in the workplace. So I'm going to launch the first poll question for you, and that's just asking what gender you identify as. If you could just let us know that, please. Okay, so we actually have an 80% female audience with us today and a 20% male. As I said, welcome to all of you. We'd like to also ask some questions about how you feel about speaking up in your organisation. So I'll launch the next sort of polling questions for you. So do you feel comfortable speaking up about safety concerns in your organisation? Do you feel comfortable about speaking up about equality, diversity and inclusion concerns in your organisation? Do you think any concerns you raise about process safety will be heard and acted upon? And do you think that any concerns you raise about equality, diversity and inclusion will be acted upon? So if you'd all answer those questions for us, that would be great. Thank you. Okay. So we do have some mixed results coming in so far. All right, what I'll do is I'll close off that poll now and I will share the results that we saw. So 88% said, yes, you do feel comfortable speaking about safety concerns, but there was still 12% that said no. In terms of feeling comfortable speaking up about ED&I concerns, it was a 50-50 split, which I think is a really interesting dynamic there that we're seeing the difference between when we're talking safety versus when we're talking equality, diversity and inclusion. And likewise, again, we see that split is a little bit more in favour of concerns being raised about process safety being acted upon than when we're talking about ED&I specifically. So there's some really interesting results. Thank you for sharing those with us. Macsene, did you want to make any comment about any of those results at this point in time?
It is very interesting. Obviously, process safety has been around, well, the discussion about process safety has been around for a long time. And I think that it's somehow maybe a little bit ingrained in the culture, especially if most of the people attending the webinar today work in some form of like engineering and a process engineering role. In terms of ED&I, it seems to be part of a movement now, and it's gathering pace, but it is interesting to see what the poll results bring out.
Okay, thanks for that. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself and why ED&I is so important to you, Macsene?
Yes, thanks. Well, I was born on the island of Montserrat, and I left there when I was 16 years old. I went to America and I was became part of the American culture. I stayed in America for 7 years and I went to 2 years of high school there and community college. So when I came here, I was 23. And this is where I went to university. And needless to say, my life experiences have really shaped how I am today. I've been exposed to people trying to erect barriers in my path. And I've actually witnessed my daughter experiencing that from a very young age when she went to primary school at the age of 5. So she was excluded from activity because of the color of her skin by her peers. And so it's really important for me to try to address those barriers and try to remove them. I'm doing that for myself and for my daughter. So it's a very important issue.
Okay, thank you for that and for sharing that story about your daughter and your history as well. What are IChemE's ambitions in the space of ED&I from your perspective on the Board of Trustees?
Well, the Board of Trustees they want to have a strategy, an ED&I strategy, and they want to be able to link that strategy to that of Strategy 2024. Chemical engineers are not the most visible in terms of how many people they do, or even though they exist, to become more visible in this space. And we already have very strong metrics in that we have a lot of females in chemical engineers, but we want to make sure that we look at other minority groups like ethnic minorities and people with disabilities as well, and extend that out. We want the strategy to try to be all inclusive, and we know that it's not a one size fits all solution. So every country, every region will have a specific demographic that we have to basically try to target, but we are endeavoring to create a strategy that will work, and we're trying to form an ED&I panel that will advise the Board of Trustees on ED&I matters.
Okay, thanks for that. So certainly a lot of challenge in there, and not the least of which some of the geographic and societal differences that we face in some of the areas we operate in as well. David, how's the staff group in ICME positioned to progress these ambitions of the Board of Trustees?
Well, hello, Trish. The staff group in ICME is in itself actually quite diverse. And a little bit of history, prior to the setting up of the Board of Trustees ED&I working group led by Macsene, we had a cross-team ED&I staff group come together to discuss and review the activities that were being undertaken across ICME. We used the Royal Academy of Engineering's Diversity and Inclusion Progression Framework to help coordinate, steer and guide us in this. For those perhaps who are unaware, the Royal Academy has done quite a lot of work, extensive work in the UK to promote ED&I across the engineering profession. And their diversity and inclusion framework is a very useful tool for professional engineering institutions to guide consideration across the wide range of activities that professional engineering institutions undertake. And just again, a little bit of history, going back to 2017, ICME completed a benchmarking exercise in ED&I and is shortly to revisit that as part of a sort of new benchmarking exercise in April this year. But across the board, I think we have willingness, enthusiasm and buy-in from the staff to support and progress the work.
Okay, thanks for that. I certainly know I'm personally very encouraged by it and excited by the opportunity as well. I guess from a safety perspective, there's many different aspects that need to be considered about ED&I. I've had a long career working in industry and I've seen many elements evolve over the years with regard to safety. My personal experience as a woman in engineering is absolutely filled of stories of things like ill-fitting PPE, from things ranging from work trousers to boots to safety harnesses even. I've got a friend who's quite petite and she always struggled to even find safety boots because they just weren't made that small back when we graduated engineering. And that's a story I've heard more than once over the years about, the inability to get something as fundamental as the right safety shoes to be able to wear. And thankfully, much of that has changed and we now see specific ranges of clothing for women, though to this day, I will never understand why women's work trousers cannot have practical pockets or enough of them. I do not understand why we can't have the same number of pockets. I don't know why this is so hard for people, really. I see you smiling, Macsene. I'm sure you experience the same thing. But these are minor annoyances in reality when we consider some of the wider implications in safety by engineering being performed from a mainly male perspective, or a very narrow perspective in that not necessarily only just male, but certainly one ethnicity, one society, that sort of thing. We need a much more broader encompassing group here. It's particularly important from a human factors perspective, obviously. For example, we strive to make workplaces more comfortable, an environment for people so they can actually function, but we still see the old chestnut of office thermostat setting. And apparently this goes back to the formula used to determine it is based on the resting metabolic rate of an adult male. which doesn't sound like that's such an unusual thing, except there's recent studies have found that the metabolic rate is as much as 35% lower for a woman. What that actually means is that we often feel about 5 degrees colder than the men in the very same office space with us. Now, again, this sounds like a minor little silly inconvenience, but if that's a control room where people are making critical safety decisions in operating plants, that is a problem, because it can lead to fatigue, it can lead to illness, it can lead to distraction. So there can be very real safety implications from things that may on the surface just seem like trivial annoyances. So Macsene, given that each of our experiences is different, what are some of the workplace experiences that you've had from an ED&I experience?
Well, basically, when I started 20 years ago, I started out in Bechtel in London, and looking around at my colleagues on a project, for example, I saw mostly white males. And it wasn't until recently that I can put my hand up and say that the teams that I've worked in have been a lot more diverse. In terms of safety, I've never met an ethnic minority HAZOP chair, but that's just my personal experience. But I know in other parts of the world there must be ethnic diverse HAZOP chairs. I have met a few female HAZOP chairs, but it just needs to reflect society, I think, and I think I am pushing for a lot more women and ethnic minorities to go into safety and to become HAZOP leaders.
I think that's a really important point, because it is about the diversity of thought. And
Yes.
that is where we see different approaches to things based on how your background has been shaped and the society in which you were formed as a human. And that can make incredible differences to the things we do in that space. David, you've worked in a variety of roles in your career, and military obviously is a very typical traditional male environment. How have you seen effective ED&I enhancing business, and some of the experiences you've had in your career? How would you describe some of those?
Yeah, thanks, Trish. You're right. I mean, the military isn't known for its diversity, or it certainly wasn't when I was in the military. We're going back a good number of years now. It's probably far more than I would want to think about. But they have made inroads, significant inroads since. But I consider myself, I was quite fortunate. I worked for a short time in IT operations. It was at the turn of the century, just after I left the Royal Air Force. And, even at that time, IT wasn't known, and I still believe it's not really known for its diversity. But I was fortunate to work for a relatively small UK company, which had a very diverse workforce. So that was probably my first real experience of working in a diverse environment. And I think I consider myself lucky to experience at first hand the sort of the breadth of solutions that a small but very diverse team can bring to the workplace. I suppose coming out in an environment where everybody tended to think in exactly the same way, because that's what we were doing in the military. This was quite liberating. And I know that we were not only more, effective because of that sort of diverse thinking, but we were also, far more efficient. And at the time, as I said, it was a small UK company, but we were doing some pan-European operations, and I think we were just smarter at the way we approached things because of the experiences that the team brought to the solutions that we had to do. I think more recently, coming back into the sort of the engineering institution environment, I probably saw the advantages of being a little bit more inclusive within the ICE when we were doing some work in Hong Kong by engaging a more diverse membership in Hong Kong for the work that we were doing there.
Okay, interesting. Thank you. It was certainly when I started my career, I graduated from mechanical engineering, and there was less than 10% of females in my year. From the first year all the way through. Interesting, the percentage of females slightly increased by the time we got to final year, because more men dropped out along the way, and none of the women that started dropped out along the way. So we actually increased our representation through the program. But then I went to work in the oil industry, and the complete difference I then saw as I was recruited in an organization as part of the graduate intake where 40% of the intake was female in that year over the engineers. And that was into a department that probably sat at around 40-45% female engineers. So it was a very interesting experience for me of being in a very male-dominated university program to then going into a professional engineering cohort that actually was far more closer to being balanced. Then I went to work at the refinery, and that whilst there was still a reasonable number of female engineers at the refinery, there was obviously far more women, or far more men, sorry, in the operator ranks. I think at the time I was there was one woman that was an refinery operator, and we had one woman that was an electrician in the maintenance department. Everybody else was male in that space. And so I've had certainly a very mixed bag of different representations. But the interesting thing I've found is that when you did have different people from different backgrounds coming together, my experience was you had people that thought a little bit differently and suggested something different. And I think for me, that was really what challenged a lot of my own thinking. And since then, I found that I have always sought to try and gain different people's input. And when I've set up teams with people, or when I've inherited teams, I've looked at how I can get different input from everybody involved in that team, because everybody has something valuable to contribute, and they all can contribute it in a different way. Macsene, what do you think are the greatest benefits to process safety from effective ED&I programs? You mentioned obviously you're yet to see a minority HAZOP chair. In your experience, you know, what do you think could be some of the benefits there?
So effective ED&I will only basically come from an engaged membership, and when everybody is engaged in the same direction. So I truly believe in communicating, and I truly believe that everyone should be given a voice. There are too many videos on LinkedIn where I've been just completely gobsmacked at men dangling from a hook from a digger, trying to change a traffic light. And I'm thinking, did he have a say in going up there? Did he have a voice? Was he able to say no? So basically, I think depending on your status, sometimes you're not given a voice. And I think we should be listening to everyone's voice when it comes to safety. I remember when I read an article, again on LinkedIn, it was written by Alison Woodford, and she wrote about her personal journey with process safety in her experience at a major refinery where she worked. And I was actually blown away by how descriptive her writing was. It made me feel like I could put myself in that scenario and feel her emotions. And it had such an impact on me just reading what she wrote. I don't know if it's because she wrote it from an emotive point of view because she's female, but it really spoke to me. And I think that we need to have case studies where everyone has a voice, because everybody's experiences, as you said, are different, and we can learn from everybody.
I was actually fortunate enough to see Alison deliver that presentation live, and let me tell you, you could have heard a pin drop as she went through that presentation. It was absolutely fantastic, because she really did take you through the emotion of it. And, you know, the emotion of how we react to things, I think, can be quite interesting. We've got a comment come in that females can have good challenges regarding safety, as they can be less macho and also consider situations from a slightly different perspective. I think the combination of both genders certainly gets the best results. And I have to admit, I have at times engaged with people in a very different way, or in actual fact sent a female safety advisor to a particular site or a particular instance for the very purpose of bringing the temperature down on something that was starting to heat up. So I would agree that there can be some great advantages in that. I've seen it and I've used it myself as a good way to try and do that. Please remember, if you've got any questions, put them into the chat box for us. So, David, what are the, you've talked about, how you saw ED&I in your career and how it's played out for you. What do you think are some of the process safety benefits that you might consider?
I think you sort of touched on it, or rather the questionnaire probably sort of, referred to it in that last statement. I think it's the benefits of diverse thinking. I mean, I think, there's a lot written about sort of groupthink, and I can't think of an area more important than safety where you'd want a diverse input into it. You need effective challenge and you need effective awareness, and I think unless you have that that sort of multivariate perspective, I think you would be very limited. So I'm trying to sort of think back in my past. As I said, in the military, it's a more formulaic sort of approach to safety. I probably witnessed some of it a little bit in Q8, working with sort of cultural differences, where you see both the upside and the downside of how the cultural differences can impact on safety. As you say, as Macsene sort of alluded to, I think with unsafe practices, and there are challenges thrown up. But I think primarily, it's around the variety of thinking and challenge that a more diverse group brings, and I can't think of a more important area than safety.
No, thanks for that. I think that's a really good point. Are there any other thoughts or comments that you'd like to raise in the discussion that we haven't touched on yet, Macsene?
Certainly. I was looking the other day at there was 8 principles of process safety, and it was drawn up by a group of 5 big organizations in the oil and gas industry. And most of the principles involved the change of thought processes going through management and the leadership of companies. And so it's a culture. Both of them have parallels, ED&I and process safety. It's definitely changes in the cultural behavior within organizations and within society. I think that we need it to come from the top. Obviously, it has to be part of the structure of the company, and the management have to buy into it. But similarly, as I said, every voice counts, and feedback should be encouraged from people that are not in leadership roles to see what they want to contribute to benefit each company. The statistics that we got when we did the poll about people's views on raising ED&I issues, and only 50% of people thinking that those issues would be heard and acted upon. That needs to change. It needs to swing a lot more towards the response that we got for process safety. And I think that we need to continue to work on that.
And I think there's perhaps some work in there around how we could look to leverage the safety initiatives, the safety culture programs that we've gone through, because we have had to learn how to embed, first of all, OHS, and then we had to learn how to extend that to process safety and work through process safety in the workforce. And now I think this is the next challenge that we need to focus on in that space and say, so how can we leverage off OHS and process safety to deliver ED&I? Because there is actually fundamentally mental well-being benefits to this as well. If people feel more inclusive, then they are going to be able to contribute more. They're going to be happier in their contribution as well. But we're going to get better outcomes from it. Dr. Marlene Kanga, who was a former president of Engineers Australia and also of the World Congress of Engineering Organisations, I'm not sure if that's the right name for it, but one of the things that she very strongly was an advocate of was looking at where we can actually harness the safety gains we've made and leverage those for ED&I and getting more engagement in that particular area as well. David, anything else you'd like to add, if you'd like to add to that point?
Yeah, I was going to pick up on Maxine's point. I mean, that's exactly what I was thinking about looking at the survey feedback. I suppose the thing that stands out, I mean, I know it's not huge numbers, but the difference in those who would feel comfortable about talking around ED&I matters in the workplace. You know, I may be wrong on this, but I suppose over my career, I've seen sort of safety introduced, and it's taken quite a long time to get to the point we are now. And, you know, I can even remember sort of, you know, how it felt like an alien environment, and, you know, it took legislation to sort of drive the thinking. And now, of course, it seems considerably far more natural to, you know, rightly so, to be addressing safety. I just wonder if ED&I is following along in a similar sort of path.
Yeah.
And you know, we'll get to a point where one would love to think, hopefully not too distant future, but we do a survey like this, and the willingness and the comfort, if you like, about speaking up over the ED&I matters will match that of safety. It's got to. So yeah, that was the thing I think that stood out for me. Was probably that's a good indication as to probably where we are with ED&I at the moment.
Yeah, and I think one of the challenges is, you know, giving people the confidence to be able to speak up in that instance as well. I know that certainly as a young engineer, I went through several different phases in my career, and you know, I thought I was the only young female engineer that went through these different phases, until I then recently read a book that was from another female that was in the Australian RAAF military, and you know, she talked about these same phases that she went through in her male-dominated career. And it was that you spend the first few years being adamant that you're not a female engineer, you're just an engineer. Just treat me like an engineer. I'm not a female engineer. Because you particularly don't want to be associated, or don't want to be thought of as that female, you know, that one that makes trouble, that one that, you know, it's all about being female. So you don't want to be associated with that. So you rally against it. And then eventually you get to the point where you actually realize you're a female engineer, and you go, oh, okay, well, this is what it is. And you just get on and do the job, and you keep doing it. And then one day you kind of wake up and think, other people are seeing me as a potential role model. Maybe I need to start acting like a potential role model now, and actually speaking up and being seen to speak up and being seen to acknowledge that I am a woman that also happens to be an engineer. And going through that stage. And then I think you get to a point, and I wondered the other day whether it just happens at about the age of 40, I don't know. You then just get a little bit angry at some of the stuff you put up with, especially over the younger years. And you think, why did I put up with that? No one else should have to put up with that coming after me. So what can I do to try and stop that? And sadly, it seems as though that might be a very consistent story for women through the ages, from what I can gather. Maybe we can try and break that cycle, and so that, you know, the young graduate engineers coming in, whether they are from minorities or whether they are female, they don't have to do the whole rallying against it, you know, and getting through each of those stages. It's an interesting book to read. It's called Womankind by Dr. Kirsten Ferguson and Catherine Fox, and it came off the back of Kirsten's Celebrating Women Twitter initiative that happened a couple of years ago, where she committed to tweeting out the positive profiles of 3 women every day for the entire year, to try and stem the tide of negative misogynistic Twitter rants from people. And it was quite a wonderful campaign. And I remember I used to wake up every day and wait and see the profiles come through to learn all about who these women were around the world and what they were doing. And they were just women like me and you and everybody else. And so that was fantastic to see. But I think it was interesting that, you know, as I said, I went through these stages, and then I saw that other people went through these stages, and I didn't realize that other people were. So yeah, hopefully we can try and do something to break that. I don't know whether those stages sound familiar to you, Macsene, at all.
I know that I've made a conscious effort to be more visible, especially this year, because my role on the board of trustees is to help to like influence the strategy going forward. And I recognize that not many people knew that I even existed on the board of trustees as a Black female engineer. And I think visibility is key. And I like the idea of putting out profiles and showing the different types of people that are involved in different activities throughout the world, whether it be in ED&I initiatives or whether it be in safety initiatives. The world needs to see that more than one type of person can speak with the same voice and be saying the same thing. And I do think that chemical engineers are not visible enough. My family still don't understand what I do. And they still don't know any famous chemical engineers out there. And we are definitely a major part of solutions, whether it be the global challenges or anything that is coming up in the future. We're going to be right at the front helping to formulate those solutions. And so I think that the world needs to know who chemical engineers are and what they do, and we need to be more visible.
Yeah, absolutely. So last week was actually the second World Engineering Day as well, on the 4th of March. UNESCO have designated the 4th of March that World Engineering Day. Again, that was the work of Dr. Marlene Kanga. And, you know, that really is the focus around trying to push the engineering involvement in the Sustainable Development Goals for the UN, because at the end of the day, it is the engineers that have the skills and ability to solve these problems. And that's critically important. David, anything you'd like to add there?
Yeah, I was going to try and sort of give a sort of perspective on your comment, Trish, and picked up by Macsene around the thinking. And I suppose, I don't know, could I call it the sort of the ages of how you sort of move your thinking in this? I've got to be very careful how I reflect it. I was very fortunate when I was at ICE to work with Dr. Jean Venables, who was the first women president of the Institution of Civil Engineers. And I've got a huge and deep respect for Jean. But I remember in many conversations with her, in fact, a huge amount of what you just said sort of really resonates, that she was the only woman studying civil engineering in her undergraduate program. When she first joined the institution and she was attending events, there were people who shouted at her she had to get her hair cut because they didn't recognize her as a woman in a group of men. You know, she overcame that, became, you know, rightly so, the first president of the Institution of Civil Engineers, and, you know, a phenomenal role model. But it was more important to her that she was seen as a civil engineer than as a female civil engineer, and I think that's a very difficult one. I can observe it from close proximity, but trying to sort of understand it, I think, is very difficult. But I mean, you know, what a role model, what a phenomenal role, but for everyone. And I think that's probably how, you know, she would want to, you know, be seen.
Yeah, it does come back to that old adage of it's hard to be what you can't see. And so that importance of being a role model for people, whether it be women, whether it be minorities, whatever, it's important to be that role model for them. I read an inspiring article today about a young Aboriginal woman that she was going through what she wanted to go and study at university and decided to do law because none of the descendants from her peoples within her nation had ever studied to be a lawyer. So she will be the first woman of her nation to become a lawyer. So, you know, she's sort of breaking that ground for her. And so, you know, it's amazing to see some of those stories, and it's critically important to try and support women in doing that. And one of the other things that Kirsten Ferguson talks about in her book is that we need to stop this idea of lowering the ladder down for women to come up after us. We actually need to throw the fishing net down so we can bring up as many as we can at once, rather than just one at a time. It's not a one at a time game, and it's not a zero-sum game. We can all continue to try and bring as many people up with us along the path as we go. And I think that's a really critical thing. Remember, people, please send in any questions in the chat box that you have. I do have another comment that I can relate to, that my family still doesn't understand what I'm doing in my career. So, I can certainly relate to that too. Actually, my family don't quite understand what I do. Although my job's quite difficult to explain to most people, I guess, as well. Do you have any, whilst we're waiting for any other questions to come in, excuse me, do either of you have any final closing thoughts you'd like to share, David?
I mean, we've sort of covered off, I think most things. I think it's great that we're having, the conversation. I think it's great that we're discussing this. I think it's, great that it's becoming more prominent. And I think, we need more opportunity to have open and sort of frank discussions. And as I said, I think the thing for me, I'm looking now actually at the little screen with the poll 2 feedback on it, and I'm just sort of fixed on, I know it's the numbers, but when we get to the point where people feel comfortable about speaking up with ED&I concerns, I think that's, an indicator. So there's a little sort of horizontal speedometer, call it what you like, that, we need to move to the right.
Yep. Thank you. Macsene?
Well, we do need to look at the numbers, and we're making a conscious effort through our strategy to monitor and measure what a membership makeup in different countries and regions throughout the world. Because now, when we know what those numbers are, we could make strides to try and change things for the better and make people feel more welcome and included. So the numbers are quite important. When I walk into a room, I'm not really sure what people see, what they see first. Do they see me coming into the room as a woman, or as an ethnic minority, or as a chemical engineer, or as a member of the Board of Trustees? Obviously, they won't be able to tell about my competence and my commitment, but what they see is what I'm interested in finding out, if what they see influences how they treat me. We all have unconscious biases, and I just hope that people get to a point where they give others a chance and give them a chance to express themselves, so that they can not be judging them based on what they can see first.
Thanks for that, Macsene. We have a question in. What would be your best general advice to young female engineers?
Is that to both of us or just to me?
It's to both of you, yeah. And I'll have a go at it too as well. So you want to go first, Macsene?
I think my advice to all engineers, but especially to the female engineers, is to try and conduct yourself with grace and poise. Sometimes people judge you before they even get to know you. And I just leading on from the point I made before, what they see is what they initially form an opinion about you before they actually know what you're capable of. And so my advice is to always conduct yourself with poise and grace, and make sure that you garner respect wherever you go. And by doing so, then the first impression always counts, and their impression of you will always be based on that first impression you give. So always conduct yourself well. That's my advice.
I like that. Thanks. David, any advice?
Difficult to argue with Maxine's advice, obviously. I suppose, it would be general advice, I hope. I think any young engineer, I would sort of recommend finding a mentor and a network that you can engage with. And, I'd like to think that IChemE, engineering institutions in general can provide those networks. And I think working in a community and finding that you're not alone, I think is very, very important. And I think try and not be concerned about speaking up and speaking out. And I think that's something that, I think it's incumbent for everyone to try and encourage that. But I think probably I would suggest try and find a mentor and start to develop a network and engage.
Okay.
Can I jump in and say one more
yeah.
thing? In addition to finding a mentor, try and find a sponsor as well. The sponsors advocate for you and pull you up with them. And therefore, if you can find a sponsor as well as a mentor, you're well on your way to becoming a leader in this game.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Thank you both for that one. And the idea that, yeah, a sponsor is different to a mentor. A mentor is someone you can go to and talk to and get advice from. But the sponsor is the person that's going to be looking out for you. And everybody needs a sponsor in their workplace and in their career. Absolutely. I think if it was from my perspective, I would say you need to remember to be yourself and not try and fit in to the group and be one of the overriding culture of whatever it is. So, you know, if it's in a very masculine dominated environment, don't try and be one of the boys. It doesn't work, because you're not. You actually are you, and that is important, and you need to be you for those young engineers out there. So be yourself. And the other thing that I've talked about a bit about my career is take an opportunity that presents itself. You never know. You might not like the job, but you won't know till you try it, and you might love it. If you don't like it, then go and do something else. And if you do like it, then that's a great finding. And, you know, I've done many jobs in my career and it was all, well, that looks interesting. I haven't done it before. Let's see if I like it or not. The interesting thing is you can discover all sorts of things about yourself, such as what you're really good at, as well as what you enjoy. And they aren't always the same thing, which was a fascinating learning as well. I discovered quite early in my career that whilst I was quite good at being at working in operations management, I didn't enjoy it. So, you know, I know that's not what I want to do. Someone's commented that we're so much stronger together. Absolutely. And if you're a male ally, we need you to speak up when you see bias as well. And I think that's a really important thing as well. Certainly we're going through quite a challenging national conversation in Australia at the moment over the last few weeks around some alleged sexual harassment and sexual assault claims within our parliament. And that has raised a number of challenges at a fundamental societal level, I think, for Australians. And part of that is that we do need our male allies to speak up and to say, you know, when they see something that's just not okay, they need to tell their mates it's just not okay, you know, not laugh at that joke uncomfortably or not, you know, degrade women or be disrespectful in a number of different ways. We actually need them to speak up and say no, pull your mates into line. Because I mean, one of the most fascinating comments that's come out lately is that I think the statistics at the moment in Australia, for example, is that 1 in 5 women will suffer from sexual harassment or sexual assault in their lifetime in Australia. Yet no man knows someone that commits sexual harassment or sexual assault. Those numbers don't add up. How is it that no one knows anybody that does it, yet women are suffering from it? So, you know, that speaking up when you're seeing the bias, I think, is incredibly important as well. So thank you very much, everybody. We might call it to a close here. We don't have any more questions coming in. So thank you both, Macsene and David, for what was, I think, a really interesting conversation. I certainly enjoyed hearing your perspectives on this important area of ED&I and the safety implications for it. I think there is some exciting work that we can do going forward to really try and combine, as I said, what we've improved on in safety over the years and how the strategies we've used to improve safety culture to help drive improving ED&I in our organisations and starting to recognise and realise what's going on and how we can support, whether it be minorities, whether it be females, it doesn't matter. It is about the equality, diversity and inclusion of all, because everybody has something of value to contribute to this conversation and we need to be willing to listen to it. I'll just quickly share for you our contact details if anybody wants to reach out or indeed follow the ICME Safety Centre on social media. So I'm not sure what it shared then, hang on. Okay. Thank you all for joining us today. We hope that you certainly enjoyed the conversation. And I'd like to leave you with one final challenge, and that is, what do you choose to challenge in your everyday life, whether you're male, female, ethnic minority? What are you going to choose to challenge to help improve the situation of further embedding ED&I into our workplaces and into our society at large, so that we can actually generate better outcomes at a societal level, but also better outcomes from a safety perspective in all the work we do? So thank you very much, David. Thank you very much, Macsene. I'd like to wish you all a happy International Women's Day, and please stay safe.
Thank you.
Thank you.